Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Coffee with a Career Coach. My name is Erica O'Toole. I'm the Associate Director in the Career Development Center, and I am joined by Lee, who I will let introduce himself in just a moment. But before I do that, as always, please feel free to ask questions during this Facebook Live, and we will make sure we get to those questions. And then just an update on my coffee. So, as we always talk about what coffee we have, this is actually a shaken espresso, which is my new favorite. So that's what I will be enjoying while speaking today with Lee. So Lee, I'm going to hand it over to you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sounds good. Thank you. So, as Erica mentioned, my name's Lee Parker, and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at Central Michigan University Libraries. So my job consists of a few things, but it mostly consists of coordinating and, in the upcoming semester, teaching Lib 197, which is our undergraduate level library course available to all undergraduate students at CMU. Engaging in outreach activities with various departments and offices on campus, which other individuals in the Library Research and Instruction Services Department don't already engage with, in the hopes of promoting greater student engagement with the resources available at the library. And in addition to that, I also conduct reference activity with students answering their questions, as well as community members' questions through our library chat feature. So, as I already mentioned, I'm part of the Library Research and Instruction Services Department, and this is a 11-person department. Almost everyone here is faculty members, and we're basically responsible for coordinating with various colleges on campus in order to teach sort of embedded instructional activities for students depending on the specializations of the individual librarians, conducting an outreach activities with these colleges and departments, and doing miscellaneous other things as well, such as conducting research because we're faculty members and doing sort of in-depth research consultations with students based on our subject specializations, as most librarians here specialize in another topic outside of library and information science. So today I'll be discussing with you sort of what the career path towards a research and instruction librarian / liaison librarian looks like, and sort of my experiences as a new faculty member moving from part-time work during graduate school to full-time faculty level librarianship work.
Awesome. And I love that we have you on today because I think this is huge. So many students maybe are curious about this area, but they just don't really know what path to go afterwards. So I really think this will be beneficial for many of our students out there. So if you could you describe the different career paths you could take in terms of like liaison research and instruction librarianship field of work?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to discuss that. So there's a few main paths that you can go down in terms of sort of pursuing research and instruction / liaison librarianship careers. And my path falls under the more sort of typical one in that I pursued initially a humanities-centered undergraduate degree. In my case, it was a bachelor's degree in history with a minor in Spanish language at Maryville College. And then after that, I pursued a library and information science centered master's degree, which in my case, it was a archives management degree at Simmons University in Boston. In addition to that, I also received a additional master's in history from Simmons University during that same period. So what's worth noting is that although this, for the most part, represents a fairly typical career path for individuals in the pursuing a research and instruction / liaison librarianship career, it's sort of interesting for me in that when I was pursuing my initial archives management graduate degree / library and information science graduate degree, I didn't originally intend on pursuing a career along those lines. I originally planned to work on an archive or museum, but I increasingly became interested in this field of work while taking specialized courses as part of my graduate degree centered around library and archival reference work or outreach activity in cultural heritage institutions. This eventually led to part-time work at institutions such as Boston College, where I worked as a reference assistant, and it sort of went from there. What's worth noting on top of that, however, is that although my path represents sort of the typical path of a lot of individuals pursuing this type of work, it by no means is the only path that you can take. In fact, an increasing number of individuals pursuing research and instruction librarianship or liaison librarianship roles don't actually have undergraduate degrees in humanities-centered fields such as history, English, etc. In fact, two examples of this in the Central Michigan University Library Research and Instruction Department include our STEM and medicine research and instruction librarian, Rebecca Ranieri, who received her bachelor's degree in biological sciences, or our arts, media, and design research and instruction librarian named Katie Edmonston, who received her undergraduate degree in studio art, painting, and drawing. While neither of them initially thought about pursuing librarianship as a career in undergrad, they said they got into it while doing part-time librarianship work at their school. And they've said that after receiving their graduate degree in library and information sciences, that having these specialized backgrounds really served as a strong asset, both when applying for the research and instruction, like specific jobs based around their subject areas of interest, and it also has heavily benefited them in their own careers. One final thing also is that this specialized background, in addition to coming through sort of different fields of undergraduate study, can also come through work that many individuals in this field did before actually pursuing their research and instruction career or pursuing it full time. One individual I've worked with in the past was at Boston College, and he is the business librarian there, and his name is Doug Olson. Before getting his current role at Boston College, he served as the senior vice president at Fidelity Investments for 16 years, and obviously that gave him very strong knowledge of the business field and really has benefited him in his work. So, in short, there's lots of different pathways, but there are a few that you can think about.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like that's with so many majors. So it's nice to hear that about this area. And I know that you had mentioned before that, you know, even after starting graduate school, you didn't necessarily intend to be in a role of this type. Something very similar happened with my degree. And so I think that's also a good piece of advice for students is, you know, just keep kind of pursuing different areas and see what you end up liking. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask you about how you feel your prior educational and non-librarianship related work experiences prepared you for this type of position.
Absolutely. So in terms of reflecting upon my undergraduate degree, when I didn't really have librarianship on my radar at all, one particularly beneficial sort of course experience I had, or set of courses I had, was when I was part of the teacher licensure program at Maryville College it was roughly 2 years. So while I didn't end up completing this program, I took a lot of courses based around instructional pedagogy, and this really served as being highly beneficial in the instruction work that I've done as part of my job here. And it also stuck out a lot on my resume when I was applying for positions such as this. In terms of my graduate education, I'd have to say that the two most beneficial courses that I took, even when I wasn't planning on going along this career path, would probably be LAS 407, Information Sources and Services, and LAS 476, Outreach and Advocacy for Cultural Heritage. These, among other things, really gave me some strong additional insights into performing both reference and instruction work in the library environment, but also in other contexts. It also taught me how to be able to reach out to communities associated with cultural heritage institutions such as museums, archives, and libraries, and how to promote that, or how to promote the resources to those communities and promote engagement with the institution as a whole. To reflect upon the second aspect of that question, which was what non-librarianship work experiences sort of prepared me for this, or sort of prepared me for this role, I'd have to say that, interestingly enough, one of the most beneficial ones outside of working at institutions such as Boston College as a reference assistant was my time as a tour guide at places in Boston such as the Old North Church. So although obviously not a librarianship role, it taught me how to be able to communicate things in an instructional yet understandable manner, and also deal with difficult patrons at times, which was helpful during my time at Boston College, working part-time as a reference assistant that I did after obtaining this initial job.
Awesome. And I think one big thing that you just touched on, and we talk about in our office a lot, is really this idea of transferable skills, right? You might not think a position is completely, is going towards something specifically, but then as you kind of go through it, you realize it actually is. So for applying for full-time work in this field, can you kind of describe your experience and how you went through that, and how you would compare the application process for the roles you had leading up to the position?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to discuss that. So just to start off with applying for part-time work at places like Boston College, where I served as a reference assistant, or Harvard, where I served as a cataloging assistant, generally those part-time positions, in terms of librarianship related work, they tend to open up maybe a month or two before the position begins. Sometimes they open up a little later. But for full-time work, like in the position that I am now, this position opened up, I think it was 4 months before my starting date, or it was made available to apply for about 4 months before my starting date. And in addition to that, another major difference between part-time and full-time sort of job application process in this work is that generally for these sorts of positions, full-time ones, they'll have one sort of virtual interview beforehand, and then for the finalists, they'll have a second in-person interview where you're asked to come to campus, and sort of a day-long affair where you meet with individuals in the department and they determine whether you're a correct fit. For the part-time positions I applied to, because it was sort of on the back end of COVID, most of the interviews that I did were just online, and it was just a single interview before starting the position. In terms of reflecting on just things to think about when applying, one thing that I feel like is pretty similar among both part-time and full-time roles in librarianship is that when you're applying, the individuals are going to realize that you're still young and new to the field and you have things to learn. What really matters is that you have the solid basis to be able to grow and succeed in this field of work whenever you get accustomed to the institution that you're working at. For my part-time work, in the case of my reference-based work, that involved having some customer service background and also having a solid knowledge of proper library reference activities gained through coursework. And for this position, it involved the reference experience that I got through my work at Boston College, and also the knowledge in instructional pedagogy, which I could be able to use to teach Live 197, change it in ways to make it more accessible to students, and also think of new innovative ways to reach out to communities on campus.
That's awesome. So how would you say the day-to-day tasks of your current full-time job compare to those of previous part-time work in academic library, and how have your previous part-time academic library experiences contributed to your current role?
So I'd say that one of the major differences between part-time and full-time work in this field, whenever you finally get accepted into one of these positions, is that with part-time work in reference or instruction-based librarianship, it tends to be a lot more structured. In my case, I would show up to the reference desk on a particular date and time. I would be structured to answer questions posed by students from 4 to 9 in the evenings on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and I would have designated times where I was supposed to be on online chat and answer questions from students, entering them over that way. In terms of the full-time position that I'm in now, one of the things that I sort of struggled with and which I had to get adjusted to is that it's a lot less structured and you have a lot more freedom in determining who you reach out to, what projects you work on, how you teach the course, and what changes you make into it if you choose to once you've gotten adjusted to it. So that's been one of the challenging aspects of it, but at the same time, it's been good to know as I finally sort of get more adjusted that I'm actually able to make some fundamental innovative changes that'll have a positive impact on the institution, which wasn't always clear when I was working part-time. I guess in terms of another thing that's worth noting is that in comparison to part-time librarianship work, full-time librarianship work, especially in a faculty position like myself, involves a lot more group collaboration than I was initially expecting. And while you may have had experience working in groups as part of classwork or part of other jobs that you've done prior to pursuing full-time work, what's complicated in terms of the position that I'm in now is that obviously you have to deal with levels of authority here, and that becomes particularly complicated when you're working on like 3 or 4 different committees working on similar but at the same time different tasks. I guess just to conclude, one other thing which is worth noting about differences between full-time and part-time work in this field is that obviously with full-time work there's a lot more pressure, especially in terms of a faculty position, because unlike in my part-time work where I was mostly answering questions directly posed by students, sort of been flipped here toward that's a lesser aspect of my job, and more important aspects now include actually teaching a credit-bearing undergraduate level course, which was a bit intimidating at first, and also having to pursue scholarship in order to ensure good academic standing in the university.
Definitely. Well, I feel like you've given us a ton of information, and given students at least a look into what you can really do in this field, which I think is super important. So to wrap up, I just want to ask you for some advice, and it can be any advice, but specifically also for people who are maybe applying to this type of role, thinking about following this type of career path, or even starting off in this type of role. What type of things they should keep in mind?
I'd say one of the things to keep in mind is that as an undergraduate student, even if you don't really think that you would want to pursue a full-time library career path in the future, it might be good to just try applying for one at your university within the user services department in the case here, or within one of the other departments. And it can be beneficial for a number of things in that if you have basic customer service experience, you should be able to have sort of a basic background which will allow you to succeed in a sort of student level job within the library, especially if it's on user services or reference based. And in addition to that, just another beneficial thing about this job, this sort of work for me, was that as a graduate student, I was very busy with schoolwork and other tasks. And when you're working at the library services desk, it's likely that in between answering questions, you'll have a bit of downtime so you can work on homework or other things in between. So that was something that was helpful for me. In terms of a few other things, when you're going about applying for full-time work in this position or in this field, like with any job, it's good to be open to looking around outside a designated geographic area for work. For example, I went to Simmons University in Boston, and while I initially assumed I'd be staying in Boston for my work, I quickly learned that when you go into a university that has a good program, it's likely that if you sort of travel outside the beaten path a bit, that degree and your experiences will still carry prominence, likely even a little bit more prominence that could be beneficial when you're trying to find employment, which I know can be stressful. Finally, one other thing I'd like to note is that for those individuals thinking about pursuing a research and instruction librarianship job or a liaison librarianship job, it's worth noting that you don't necessarily need to worry if you're not an expert in the subject knowledge that the particular job would be liaisoning for. Like, for example, if you're liaisoning for the health sciences department or the humanities department, things like that. While there are an increasing number of individuals entering the field of liaison librarianship with backgrounds, specifically undergraduate degrees in the fields that they would be interested in liaisoning for, the reality is that this proportion is still relatively small, and that many individuals through either outside work, like I mentioned, or even on the job training, are able to learn how to liaison with different colleges or departments as long as they have the basic librarianship skills behind them. So that's sort of nice to know.
Awesome. Well, Lee, thank you so much for all of this knowledge. I really appreciate having you on today, and I think this gives our students a lot of good insight. If anyone watching has any questions after the fact, you can still put them out on Facebook, and we will try our best to get those answered. And we appreciate you all joining us. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful Friday.
Good Friday.